In one of the most technologically advanced countries on Earth, a nation of bullet trains, robotic hotel staff, and toilets with more settings than some cars, tens of millions of people go to sleep every night the same way their ancestors did centuries ago, on the floor, not out of poverty, not because they can't afford a bed. Walk into apartments in Tokyo that cost more per square foot than almost anywhere else on the planet, and you will still find a folded futon, a woven tatami mat, and no bed frame in sight. For decades, outsiders have assumed this was simply tradition holding on a little too long, something that would fade out as Japan modernized. It hasn't faded. If anything, floor sleeping has quietly spread beyond Japan's borders, showing up in minimalist design magazines and wellness circles across the world, marketed as a discovery, when in Japan, it was never lost in the first place. So what is actually going on here? Why would a country capable of building anything choose, generation after generation, to sleep closer to the ground than almost anywhere else in the developed world? The answer isn't one thing. It's a stack of very good reasons built up over centuries that all point in the same direction. And the real reason, the one that ties everything else together, doesn't show up until we're most of the way through this video. Stay with me until then, because once you see it, you'll understand why this practice never needed saving in the first place. It was never broken. Let's start at the beginning, because the origin of this practice is older and more practical than most people assume. Long before mattresses and bed frames existed anywhere in the world, the earliest form of Japanese floor sleeping was startlingly simple. Straw mats laid directly on wooden or packed earth floors with cloth or animal hide as covering. This wasn't a design choice in the way we think about design choices today. It was what was available, refined slowly over generations into something more specific and more comfortable. By the Edo period, roughly the 17th through 19th centuries, the futon, as we'd recognize it today, had taken shape. A thick, quilted mattress meant to be unrolled at night and folded away each morning, paired with a lighter quilted cover. Wealthier households had elaborate versions with silk covers and elaborate padding. Common households had simpler versions, often stuffed with cotton rather than silk. But almost everyone, across almost every level of society, slept this way. It wasn't a marker of poverty. It was simply how a room worked. Here's the detail that matters most for understanding why this didn't fade out with modernization. It wasn't just history that kept the tradition alive. It was 20th century circumstance reinforcing it all over again. After the Second World War, Japan rebuilt its cities under enormous space pressure, and a huge share of new housing came in the form of compact apartment developments, sometimes only a few hundred square feet for an entire family. In that environment, a piece of furniture that could vanish into a closet every morning wasn't a nostalgic throwback. It was, once again, the only realistic option for millions of families rebuilding their lives in genuinely tiny spaces. The practice survived the war, not because Japan clung to the past, but because the exact same practical problem, too little space, too much furniture, reappeared, and the floor solved it a second time. And that detail, how a room worked, is where the first real reason starts to take shape. A Japanese home, historically and still today in many traditional layouts, is built around a room called a washitsu, a tatami-floored room with no single fixed purpose. During the day, that same room might host a meal, a conversation with guests, or quiet reading. In the evening, the futon comes out of a deep closet called an oshir, is unrolled across the tatami, and the exact same room becomes a bedroom. In the morning, the futon folds back into the closet, and the room returns to whatever else it needs to be that day. Think about what that actually solves. A Western home, historically, needed a dedicated bedroom, a room whose entire purpose for 16 hours of every day was simply to hold a piece of furniture nobody was using. A bed frame doesn't fold away. It doesn't become a dining table or a reading room in the afternoon. It just sits there, permanently claiming square footage, whether anyone is sleeping in it or not. In a country where land has been scarce and expensive for centuries, where even now, a modest apartment in a major city can cost what a house costs elsewhere, that permanently claimed space was never something Japan could afford to waste. The futon solved a math problem that Western furniture never had to solve, because Western homes, for most of their history, simply had more land to spread across. That's reason one, and it's the most practical of all of them. The floor was never a substitute for a bed. The floor was the solution to a problem beds create. Now here's where it gets more specific, because the mat itself, the tatami beneath the futon, is doing more work than most people outside Japan ever realize. Tatami is woven from a rush grass called igusa, layered over a firm, compressed straw or foam core, and finished with a fabric border. It looks decorative. It is not merely decorative. Igusa has a genuinely useful physical property. It absorbs and releases moisture from the air, acting as a natural humidity buffer in a climate, much of Japan, that swings between intensely humid summers and dry winters. A tatami floor draws moisture out of the air when it's too humid and releases it back when the air is too dry, functioning almost like a passive climate regulator built directly into the floor. Some research on igusa has also pointed to mild, natural antibacterial and air purifying properties, along with the material's distinctive scent, often described as calming. The reason a traditional Japanese room has that specific, recognizable smell the moment you walk in. There's a temperature benefit too. Tatami, with the air pockets built into its woven structure, stays cooler underfoot in summer than solid flooring, and the futon on top of it can be swapped seasonally. A heavier, padded version for winter, a lighter, breathable version for summer, without needing to buy or store an entirely new mattress. The floor stays constant. Only the layer on top of it changes with the season. There's also a maintenance advantage that rarely gets mentioned. A futon, unlike a mattress, is genuinely portable, light enough for one person to carry, fold, and hang. Traditionally, futons are aired out on a balcony railing or a stand on sunny days, exposed directly to sunlight and moving air, which helps reduce moisture buildup and the dust mites that tend to accumulate in a mattress that never leaves its frame for years at a time. A mattress you can't move gets cleaned around. A futon you carry outside gets cleaned through. Slow down here because this is worth sitting with for a moment. A Western bed is one object, built for one climate, used year-round regardless of season. A Japanese floor and futon system is closer to a layered system, a stable, climate-responsive base with a top layer that adapts. It's a different way of thinking about what a bed is even supposed to be. That's reason two. The material itself is functional, not just traditional. Reason three takes us somewhere most people wouldn't think to look: earthquake safety. Japan sits on some of the most seismically active ground on Earth. Major earthquakes are not a rare historical footnote. They are a recurring, planned-for reality of daily life, reflected in building codes, emergency drills, and, as it turns out, furniture design. A raised bed frame In the middle of a significant earthquake is a piece of furniture someone can be thrown from. Tall, freestanding furniture, wardrobes, bookshelves, elevated bed frames becomes a genuine hazard when a room starts shaking violently, both from falling and from the furniture itself toppling. A futon on the floor removes one of those hazards entirely. There's no height to fall from. There's no elevated frame to be thrown against. In a country where preparing for the next earthquake is a constant, quiet backdrop to ordinary life, a lower sleeping profile isn't nostalgic. It's a small, sensible reduction of risk, repeated in millions of homes. This is not the primary reason floor sleeping exists. The practice predates modern seismic engineering by centuries, but it is a genuine reason it has persisted and continued to make practical sense long after the original historical circumstances that created it had changed. There's a fifth reason worth understanding, and it's the one that shows floor sleeping was never really an isolated choice about beds at all. It's one piece of a much larger relationship Japan has with furniture close to the ground. Walk through a traditional Japanese room, and you'll notice the futon isn't the only thing sitting low. Zabuton, flat floor cushions, replace chairs. A chabudai, a short-legged table barely taller than a dinner plate, replaces a standard dining table. In winter, a kotatsu, a low table with a heat source built underneath and a thick blanket draped over the frame, becomes the center of the entire household's evening. Everyone sitting on the floor around it, rather than gathered around chairs. None of these developed in isolation. They all come from the same underlying logic. Furniture that sits low, takes up less visual and physical space, stores away more easily, and keeps a room adaptable rather than locking it into one fixed arrangement. Once you see the floor-level table, the floor-level cushions, and the floor-level heat source, the floor-level bed stops looking like an unusual exception and starts looking like the obvious, consistent extension of everything else already happening in that room. Japan didn't just decide to sleep differently, it built an entire coherent philosophy of low furniture, and sleeping was simply one application of it. Arguably the most practical one, since it's the piece of furniture used for the most hours of anyone's day. There's a second concept sitting underneath this one connected to Buddhist thought that has shaped Japanese design for over 1,000 years. A deep cultural comfort with impermanence. Nothing is meant to be fixed and unchanging forever. Not a room's purpose, not the arrangement of a home, not even the specific futon you slept on, since traditional futons were regularly aired out, sometimes replaced, never treated as a single permanent object bolted into your identity the way a Western bed, capitalized, singular, central to a room built around it, tends to be. A Western bedroom says, this room is permanently, unchangeably for sleeping, and here is the large, heavy, expensive object that proves it. A traditional Japanese room says, this room is for whatever this moment needs, and sleep is simply one of the things that happens here, brought out when it's time and put away when it isn't. There's something almost countercultural about this, viewed from where most of the world sits today. Modern life, especially in the West, has increasingly organized itself around ownership and permanence as signs of success. A bigger bed, a dedicated room for every function, more furniture as evidence of more stability. Japan's floor sleeping tradition quietly argues the opposite case, and has for centuries, that a life organized around flexibility, around rooms and objects that can become something else when they're needed to, isn't a downgrade from permanence. It's a different, equally valid answer to the same underlying question of how to live well in the space you actually have. That is the real answer to why the Japanese sleep on the floor. Not because they haven't discovered beds, not because of poverty or tradition for tradition's sake, or even the very real practical reasons we've already gone through. It's because an entire culture built its relationship with domestic space around flexibility and impermanence rather than permanence and ownership. And a bed frame, by its very nature, is one of the most permanent, single-purpose objects a person can put in a room. The floor was never a compromise. It was the logical result of a completely different starting question. Not what furniture do I need for this room, but what does this room need to be able to become? And this is exactly why the practice is quietly spreading now, decades after Western design assumed it would disappear. Walk through modern minimalist design circles in the West, not in Japan, and you'll find low platform beds, floor-adjacent frames, and multi-purpose rooms being marketed as a fresh discovery, often explicitly citing Japanese influence. What's actually happening is not a new trend catching on. It's the rest of the world slowly arriving on its own schedule at a question Japan settled centuries ago. If any part of this made you want to try it, here's how to actually do that without needing a full Japanese room renovation. Start small. A quality futon, or a firm topper laid on a low platform rather than a full mattress on a frame, is the easiest entry point. Low center of gravity, firm, even support, and crucially, tested for a few weeks before you decide anything permanent. Fold it away or store it during the day, if your space allows, even just occasionally, and notice what that does to how the room feels the rest of the time. Now, reason 6 is the one people ask about the most, and it's also the one that deserves the most caution, because a lot of what gets claimed about it online overstates the science considerably. Does sleeping on a firmer surface actually help your back? Here's what's actually reasonably well supported, and what isn't. Research comparing mattress firmness and lower back pain has produced genuinely mixed results. Some studies have found medium firm surfaces outperform both very soft and very firm surfaces for chronic lower back pain, while other research has found firmer surfaces beneficial for specific conditions and populations. What most sleep researchers agree on is less dramatic than the internet claims. The correct firmness is highly individual, dependent on your body weight, your typical sleep position, and your specific spinal alignment. There is no single surface, futon, memory foam, spring mattress that is universally correct for every body. What can be said honestly is this: a traditional Japanese futon on a firm tatami base provides a notably different kind of support than a deep, plush Western mattress, more even, less sinking at the hips and shoulders, which some people, particularly those who sleep on their back or stomach, find genuinely more comfortable and wake from with less stiffness. Other people, particularly side sleepers who need more cushioning at the hip and shoulder, find a very firm surface uncomfortable without additional padding. The honest version of reason 6 is not the floor is medically superior. It's that a firm, even surface works very well for a meaningful portion of people. And Japan's long-standing familiarity with sleeping this way means many Japanese households have simply never needed to solve a problem: chronic mattress-related back discomfort that plush Western mattresses sometimes create for exactly the body types that don't suit them. This is general information, not medical advice. If you have ongoing back pain, The honest next step is a conversation with a physical therapist or doctor about your specific situation, not a mattress recommendation from a video. Now, here is where we get to the reason underneath all the other reasons. The one that actually explains why floor sleeping never disappeared, even as Japan became one of the wealthiest, most modern nations on Earth, fully capable of switching to Western beds the moment anyone wanted to. It has almost nothing to do with practicality at all. It's philosophical. There's a concept in Japanese aesthetics and daily life called ma. Loosely, the meaningful pause, the deliberate, empty space. The idea that a space gains its value partly from what it doesn't permanently contain. A room that can become anything, a dining space, a sitting room, a bedroom, depending on what's temporarily brought into it, is a room shaped by ma. A room permanently defined as the bedroom, filled with a bed that can never become anything else, is the opposite of that idea entirely. Pay attention to your sleep position before you start. If you're primarily a back or stomach sleeper, a firm surface tends to feel supportive almost immediately. If you're a side sleeper, expect an adjustment period and don't be afraid to add a thin layer of padding at the hip and shoulder, rather than assuming the entire concept simply isn't for you. Many people who eventually prefer a firmer setup started with a slightly softer version and worked their way down over a few months, rather than switching all at once. Give it real time before judging it. A body accustomed to years of a deep, plush mattress will feel a firm surface as uncomfortable for the first several nights, almost regardless of whether it's ultimately a better fit. That adjustment period is normal, not a sign of failure. If after 2 to 3 weeks of consistent use, it still isn't working, that's genuinely useful information about your body, not a referendum on the entire practice. The goal was never to convince you the floor is objectively correct for every body and every home. The goal was to show you that an entire country built a completely coherent, thoughtful answer to how a room and a body should relate to each other. And that answer has survived every wave of modernization Japan has gone through, not because nobody offered an alternative, but because the alternative never solved a better problem than the one Japan had already solved. So here's what I actually want to know. Before you close this video, which of these reasons genuinely surprised you the most? The earthquake safety angle that almost nobody talks about? The multi-purpose room solving a math problem beds were never built to solve? Or the deeper idea underneath all of it, that an entire culture chose impermanence over permanence on purpose for centuries? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever actually tried sleeping on a futon or a firm floor setup yourself, I want to hear exactly what that was like, because the real experience is always more interesting than the theory. If this changed how you think about your own bedroom even slightly, share it with someone who's convinced their expensive mattress is the only correct way to sleep. They might be one folded futon away from realizing the floor was never the downgrade they assumed it was. I'll see you in the next one.